So this second session from the Arab Forum for Sustainable Development will be focusing on the future. We have our esteemed guest with us. We live in a very bleak moment in the region as we are witnessing what's happening in Gaza and other regions and other countries. So how can we look to the future? What kind of prospect, what kind of plans? How can we think strategically in building a better future for the coming generations? I'm very pleased to have with me in this session, I would like to welcome Mr. Guy Ryder, the Under-Secretary General of the United Nations for Policy. Your first intervention, please go ahead, and then I will introduce the other guests as we speak. Please go ahead. You have 5 minutes, right?
5 minutes to talk about the future. I'll do my best. In fact, I'm specifically going to talk about the summit of the future, and I really welcome this opportunity to give you a little bit of information about the summit of the future, which is the #1 event in the UN's calendar this year. The origin of the Summit of the Future comes from the Secretary General. He wrote a report in 2021 called Our Common Agenda, in which he proposed this summit with some very clear, but at the same time, very ambitious objectives. He felt that we needed a summit that would have the task of preparing the multilateral system, the UN system, for the future, for the challenges of the future in a very rapidly changing world, but also a multilateral system that could deliver better on the commitments we've already made, be it the Charter of the United Nations nearly 80 years ago or the SDGs that we committed to in 2015. So this is a summit, the aim of which is to bring about, to generate a more inclusive, a more effective, a more networked multilateral system. And we've had a long process. This all began back in 2021. In September of last year, after very many proposals and discussions in New York, the General Assembly has decided that the Summit of the Future in September should negotiate and adopt a Pact for the Future. And we're now starting on the process of negotiation of this Pact for the Future. And I want to underline, I'm going to take you through what this Pact has in it, or what it is likely to have in it. But please keep in mind that the Secretary General has described this summit as a once-in-a-generation opportunity to strengthen and re-dynamize the multilateral system in a world which needs a multilateral system capable of responding credibly and effectively to the multiple global challenges that we face. And with that in view, the General Assembly has decided that we should try to adopt a Pact for the Future with 5 chapters, 5 basic headings in it. And let me tell you what those headings are. It would, by the way, start with an introductory section, a chapeau, which would set out, recall the basic principles of the United Nations, and reaffirm them in the very rapidly changing conditions in which we live. And then the 5 chapters are as follows. The first chapter would be on sustainable development and the financing of sustainable development. This is all about completing the job of the 2030 Agenda and the SDGs. And we know that halfway through the journey to the realization of the SDGs, we are way off target. Only 15% of targets are on track. So the first thing we need to do is to re-dynamize our collective efforts to deliver on the SDGs. And that is what Chapter 1 is about. The second chapter, and for reasons which are most unfortunate, I think it will resonate very strongly in this region and with this audience, is international peace and security. The Secretary General is proposing a new agenda for peace that would seek to renew and add to the United Nations toolbox to achieve its basic founding objective, to protect the world from war and from conflict. And if you look around our conflict-ridden world, not just in Gaza or other places, you can see that the UN is perceived to be falling short in its capacity to prevent or to end conflicts. The Security Council has been unable to act as I think we all would wish it to act. UN peacekeeping operations around the world are under pressure. The Secretary General is proposing an all-inclusive set of new initiatives across what he calls the continuum of peace, from prevention, root causes of conflict, to peace building, to peacekeeping, to peace enforcement, to exit from conflict and reconstruction. The world badly needs this agenda, and that will be chapter 2 of our Pact for the Future. Chapter 3 speaks to something which has been much discussed in this forum: science, technology, innovation, digital cooperation. I think we're all aware that the world is being moved and changed, transformed by the rapid pace of technological innovation, with its opportunities which are manifest and its risks and challenges which are equally manifest. So how do we put technology to work for humanity, to deliver on the SDGs, to deliver the benefits of technology, not just for some, not just for the lucky few, but broadly across the world's population? And by the way, within this section, there will also be particular attention paid to artificial intelligence and the governance of artificial intelligence, something which is developing with extraordinary rapidity and depth in our lives. And by the way, to the Pact will be annexed a global digital compact to give form to all of these things. The fourth chapter is a chapter about youth and future generations. The piece on youth is about improving the participation of young people in the work of the UN. Anybody who works in the UN knows that we've made considerable efforts to involve young people, to give them the microphone so that we hear the voice of young people. But young people are saying, what is the meaning of our participation? It's very nice to be invited to a meeting. It's very nice to get an opportunity to speak. But if there's no consequence to our participation, what is its value? So the Secretary General wants to make the participation of youth more meaningful and more systemic rather than episodic. And we will also deal with the social and economic issues of youth employment, social protection, education. The aspect of future generations is different. Future generations, it's not about the young people with us today. It's about the 10 billion people who will be born before the end of this century. They're not with us yet, but there are 10 billion who will be born before the end of this century. The question here, and it's a distinct question, is what are the responsibilities of decision makers and policy makers today, taking decisions today, in respect of the interests, the rights of future generations? And the proposition here is that we need to take intentional and consciously into account the rights of those future generations. So we will have a declaration on future generations annexed to the Pact. The last chapter, I'm getting to the end, don't worry, is about transformation of governance. There are multiple parts of the multilateral system, our governance systems, that are out of phase with the realities of the world today. The UN was founded in 1945 when we had 51 member states. Today we have 193 member states. But our basic architecture reflects the world of 1945, not of 2024. And we have to re-examine our governance architecture in that light. So that means the Security Council, that means the General Assembly, that means ECOSOC, and the President of ECOSOC has been with us. But it also means examining governance systems outside the UN, but relevant to the UN, and most particularly, and this is fundamentally important, and it will be my last word, the international financial architecture. The International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, also institutions set up in the 1940s, and which have not changed fundamentally, or at least to the extent that they would need to reflect today's world. our member states negotiating for the Pact for the Future are very much focused on what needs to be done to reform the international financial architecture, to make it reflect today's realities, and make it better able to help us deliver on the Sustainable Development Goals. Moderator, that is a process we are embarked upon. A zero draft of the Pact has been circulated to member states at the end of January. The negotiating process is on course. It is difficult, very difficult, and it's going to be a major challenge to get to the level of ambition and agreement of a Pact that our circumstances require. I have to say that the Arab region has a fundamentally important role to play in these negotiations, and any way that the UN Secretariat can accompany and help and promote that participation, and you can advise on how that could be done, will be very willingly and actively responded to. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, but I would like to quickly ask you on chapter number 2, when you mentioned the inability of UN, like Security Council and other bodies, to implement what they should be doing because of political limitations. Is there a will among decision makers, among policy makers, to make that change? Do you feel that? Or maybe they want to benefit more and keep the UN as restricted as it is today, so they will keep their policies?
It's a great question to which I do not yet have an answer. In September I will be able to answer you, but here's the interesting point. I'm often asked, is this a good moment with all of the conflicts, all of the problems in the world? Is this a good time to have a summit of this nature, where there are so many obstacles in the world, so many obstacles to agreement? And my answer to that is it may be a difficult thing, but it's an absolutely necessary thing, because be it climate change, be it Gaza, be it Ukraine, all of these things demonstrate that we need to strengthen multilateralism if we are to be able to give credible answers to the challenges before us. Because my sentiment is that many parts of the global population are beginning to question whether we are up to the job. They like the idea of multilateralism, but they're somewhat skeptical about the practice of multilateralism, and they have reason.
Thank you, Mr. Ryder. I will move now to the second speaker, which is a special guest, Ambassador Khairat Saribey. He's the Secretary General of Conference on Interaction and Confidence Building, CICA. Mr. Ambassador? Yes, please.
I hope now it works. So thank you so much for invitation, and I will deliver in a very short
Please,
way.
3 minutes if you possible.
Okay. So it is my gratitude to Dr. Rola Dashti for this wonderful invitation, and as the Secretary General of the Conference of Interaction and Confidence Building Measures. It's a long name. We do prefer the short abbreviation CICA. I reflect on the initiative proposed 3 decades ago by the first president of Kazakhstan, His Excellency Nursultan Nazarbayev. CICA serves as an intergovernmental forum for dialogue, addressing common regional issues amidst globalization, economic development, and escalating challenges. Today, CICA stands as a pan-Asian organization comprising 28 member states across the continent. Notably, 8 ESCWA member states are also members of CICA. In December, Saudi Arabia, consensus was reached to grant observer status to Saudi Arabia, and application of Morocco for observer status is under consideration. With inclusiveness and voluntariness as fundamental principles, CICA provides equal opportunities for diverse member states to engage in joint discussions and reach consensus-based decisions. CICA catalog of confidence-building measures offers a broad spectrum of cooperative areas within its 5 dimensions, not chapters, but 5 dimensions, which is economic, environmental, human, new challenges and threats, and military political. CICA's Asian approach emphasizes unity amidst diversity, focusing on what unites people across the continent. And the ongoing transformation process aims to enhance CICA as a full-fledged international organization, reflecting the new role of Asia in global economic and political development. SICA places significant emphasis on the vital synergy between governmental efforts and businesses to achieve sustainable development goals and build resilient economies. Over the past 2 years, the agenda of SICA's Business Council has been filled with topics such as the digitalization of business processes in small and medium enterprises, food security, renewable energy, and green financing. This year, SICA Business Council, along with the SICA Business Forum to be held in Bishkek, Kyrgyzstan, will focus primarily on prioritizing sustainable development in SMEs, leveraging AI for SME development, enhancing cross-border trade through e-commerce advancement, and other related areas. Looking ahead, SICA is preparing for major events in this year, including the Ministerial Conference on Environmental Issues in Astana, initiated by President Tokayev of Kazakhstan. Distinguished guests, over the past 6 months, we have witnessed a concerning escalation of violence in West Asia, resulting in significant casualties and suffering among civilians. It is regrettable and saddening that civilian lives are being disregarded. Humanitarian issues are being overlooked, weapons are being used indiscriminately, and hostage-taking tactics are being employed. Attempting to resolve long-standing political problems through force is unacceptable. Such violence only perpetuates further violence. Recently, Kazakhstan, under its SICA chairmanship, provided humanitarian aid to the people of Gaza, contributing to global efforts to address humanitarian crisis in the region. The resolution of Israeli-Palestinian conflict on the basis of two-state solution is indispensable for comprehensive and lasting peace in the Middle East. By the way, SICA is the only platform where Palestine and Israel enjoy the very equal status. Integrating SICA into the UN Global Partnership is a key priority. By the way, SICA Secretariat has made a substantial contribution to recommendations for a new agenda for peace, advocating for enhancing the partnership of regional organizations with UN to address global cross-sectoral challenges. In conclusion, SICA remains committed to deepening dialogue and cooperation, particularly in West Asia. We are dedicated to forging a resilient partnership with the UN and the Arab League in pursuit of regional and global peace and prosperity. And I thank you. Shukran jazilan. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We'll be moving now to our next speaker, Mr. Jamal Saghir, a professor of practice, Institute for the Study of International Development, Mangail University. Welcome, Mr. Jamal. As you know, we're living in a region where we have several failing economies. So governance is a key question. What do you think, in your opinion, are the key points to consider for the future of the region, especially when it comes to governance, when it comes to, we have failing economies. Lebanon is a major example, not only Lebanon, you look Iraq, Syria, Egypt at the moment. What are the key points to be considered, in your opinion?
Can you hear me? Oops, is it working? Is it working? Can you hear me? Good afternoon. I'm very pleased to be here. I spent my whole career at the World Bank in Washington, so probably Guy will be happy to hear about my views on that when he asks me the question. But I'm back to Lebanon right now, and I teach at McGill, AUB, and around the world, basically, what I live. This is an important question. I think let's start by saying that the world has changed significantly since the current governance system were established. While the economy right now, globally, is showing a little bit of growth, and the IMF latest figures give us 3%. But this will be affected by the geopolitics, regional tension, and what is good news could become bad news, and spoiler worldwide. For our region, when we look at it right now, it's still uncertain. For the last 10 years, growth has been less than 3%. So it's not last year only, last decade. This year, the latest IMF is showing 2.9%. So we're still below the average of the world. This region is being excluded, and I will give you a bit more argument, from what's happening in many poles in the world. I see different factors affecting that growth. Of course, the conflict in Gaza, the fluctuation of the oil price, even as robust oil activity continues, the continued necessarily tight policy setting in several of the Arab economy, and all of this are affecting what's going here. In addition to that, the region will be mainly shaped by 6 poles. Crisis management and precautionary will be critical because the impact is acute and risks are elevated. And elsewhere, Arab countries will need to continue to have buffers. If they don't build buffers in the medium world, they will not be able to sustain even the 3% growth that we'd like to see. Monetary policy will need to a certain extent remain focused on price stability. And fiscal policy should be tailored to countries' need, as well create fiscal space. Most of the countries that are sitting in this room don't have fiscal space. Therefore, structural reform remain critical for boosting growth, strengthening resilience, both in the near and long term. So, especially in countries like Jordan, Lebanon, Tunisia, Egypt, which need those structural reforms to be able to sustain their growth. I see also global governance system, global economy, and uncertainty around disruption linked together. China's economic future will affect this region. And finally, rising debt that we've seen in the region and capital outflows to advanced economy will be another trend that we need to watch carefully, in addition to the trajectory of the commodity and energy prices. But even if we want to be a bit optimistic and forecast a sustained growth in our region, let's face it, we are now at the turning point. Let me explain. Globalization in the Arab world has had a very complex and different effect. It has to a certain extent led to increased trade and investment, but we never globalized. The only good example of globalization is United Arab Emirates, which has ranked to become the Middle East's most globalized economy, with an aggressive pursuit of growth via globalization, strongly supported by the private sector and public, and thanks to its position as a hub trade. That's where you have seen the flow of investment. In the other MENA region, we still are behind any of this. Now, when we see globalization, what's happened in the world, it's also a turning point. Around 3,000 trade restrictive measures were imposed globally in 2022. There were only 1,219. So globalization worldwide is being questioned. Our region, who was never really globalized, is in the bad seat. Imagine what's going to happen to us. So we're going to be even more on the side of the global economy if we don't start doing serious global reform. In this context, I see political pressure. You talked about them. But in this context of reform for the future, and I think, Mr. Undersecretary, you are right about it, we need to take into account the geopolitical landscape, the economic fragmentation, which is costing 8% of the GDP worldwide, and in the Arab world around 10 to 15%. We talk about technological advancement. We talk about the evolvement of the economic dynamic within the Arab world. So I believe that the global governance system remain and play a crucial role in maintaining international order and addressing global challenge. The question for the region here, how can we be specific? And I see a few points, if you allow me. The current global governance often reflects the power dynamics post-World War II. There is need for a more equitable balance of power and representation, especially in the decision-making process within the international organization. Where is the World Bank? Where is the African Development Bank? Where is the IMF? All those international organizations, not only the two in Washington, we need to talk about them, what's happening here. Because we have seen the new international and financial institution in China, the new big one, they are better organized, quicker in decision-making, and giving more impact than the traditional one. The reform of international financial architecture should acknowledge the unique economic, social, political dynamic of the Arab world. We have not been in this case. It involved financial mechanism, assistance program to the Arab nation, This region receives more concessional funding than grants compared to any other region of the world, whatever for climate change or anything else. We are borrowing. Why we are not in this equation? There is also a need for greater representation of the Arab and the government countries and the global institution at the IMF and the World Bank. Yes, we have 2 seats, but we are much bigger in the economy. So why this has not been questioned? Or we have 3 seats actually. We have 2 at the World Bank and 2 at the IMF. Reform should address the disparities within the Arab world and between the Arab world and the global communities. We talked about inequities this morning. Actually, the inequities within the country, between the country, and within the region. And that's unique if you want. Other part of the world was able to cut that inequality, Latin America or East Asia. This region still growing gaps instead. The international financial architecture should be reformed better to support sustainable development initiative in the Arab world. And also the reform should emphasize the resilience of the international financial architecture. And here we have to be much more innovative. On climate finance, debt swap that ESCWA is leading for different countries in Jordan, Tunisia, as well probably Egypt, is an important instrument. So we need to tailor international instrument to this region. This region is not issuing any green fund as it should be. We should be much more aggressive. So the whole instrument that the institutions worldwide are developing should be much more embraced in this part of the world. The region should get also its part of the climate finance, as I said earlier. And finally, global governance system should encourage greater coordination, cooperation between Arab countries and the international communities. We don't see enough of this. It's good to have this event, and I congratulate ESCWA and the Undersecretary for doing this, but it's not enough. We need to do it in different countries. We have to do it more often so that you're building consensus and you have people talking about those issues of governance. Governance is an important aspect. I witnessed the collapse of the former Soviet Union. I was lucky at the World Bank. I was among the first West mission when I saw the Berlin Wall collapsed. We are now at the same period. We saw the collapse of the Berlin Wall and the creation of the Washington Consensus was pushing for reform, was pushing for liberalization, was pushing for capitalization. What's happening right now, we are in a world which is lost, and therefore this summit will have to find a vision, a new mission for the world and for the leader to get us back on track. The world is off track. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Saghir, but I would like to follow up on another question. What examples can you give of an effective multilateral solutions, global or regional, for sustainable finance?
Look at the way Eastern Europe was able to integrate Europe. Neighbors matter. Neighbors matter. If you look at the way Poland becoming now an important country influencing the EU, where 40 years ago Poland was an Eastern European country, or you look at Croatia, Czech Republic. So the former Soviet Union collapse and the development of Eastern Europe, the way we've seen the country going much more aggressively, and the way they develop their industry, the way they cooperate among themselves, the way they decided to join the EU and therefore remove their subsidy, clean their energy, is a good example. The other example is the way you've seen Korea developing, South Korea. South Korea, I remember 25 years ago, they came to my office to borrow from the World Bank. Korea right now is a country that is giving aid to the world. So cooperation, development, technological breakthrough. We need the example we have seen in all those countries that they are always pushing the envelope beyond the curve. In our region, we are often below the curve, or we are catching to the curve. And I think that's the example we have seen. But most of the example we've seen, especially in developing countries, are impressive in this way. Small country like Rwanda in Africa, they are doing miracles, actually. If you look at the drones that are being able to send medicine to the small villages, nobody else is doing it. Kenya reform of the agriculture sector, very interesting, very innovative, all by telephone, before even Europe doing it. A lot of innovation coming from the people, from locally led people. And I think we have to work on the communities, and we have to encourage the communities and give them incentives, and that's where you see development blossoming as you go.
Thank you, Professor. I will move now to Arabic. ضيفتنا الثانية هي المحامية ديالا شحادة من مركز الدفاع عن الحقوق والحريات المدنية وحقوقية وناشطة بمجال الدفاع عن الحريات بلبنان، وعندك خبرة على مستوى قضايا مختلفة بالمنطقة. عم نعيش لحظة صعبة ديالا، بمعنى القناعة بالعدالة الدولية بظل ما يحصل بغزة وبظل ظلامات كتير عم بتعيشها المنطقة، بتطرح دايما السؤال: أين القانون الدولي؟ أي جدوى من القوانين الدولية؟ مع فقدان القناعة أو الأمل بأنه هاي القوانين تستعيد عدالة أو أمن أو استقرار. كيف يمكن للعدالة الدولية والقانون الدولي بعصرنا باللحظة اللي عم نعيشها اليوم أنه يعيد الأمن والاستقرار لمنطقة تفتقد لأبسط مقومات هذا الأمن وهذا الاستقرار؟ غزة قد تكون المثل الأكثر يعني بروزاً، ولكن في أيضاً سوريا، السودان، اليمن، في كتير دول عم بتعاني من هالشيء. تفضلي.
شكراً ديانا. مع التأكيد أنه هيدي النقطة الأساسية مرتبطة أيضاً باللي تحدث عنه السيد جيرايدر بخصوص مؤتمر المستقبل بسبتمبر القادم، لما قال أنه الفصل الثاني بيتعلق بأجندة جديدة للسلام العالمي. السلام العالمي يفترض هو هدف الأساسي لتأسيس الأمم المتحدة قبل 80 سنة، هو غايتها النهائية، وكل الأهداف الأخرى هي أهداف تمهيدية لهالغاية النهائية. وبالحديث عن التنمية المستدامة بالمنطقة العربية، التنمية المستدامة ليست الغاية النهائية برأيي. الغاية النهائية هي ازدهار والسلام للفرد والشعوب. ومن المحزن أنه بالحديث عن التنمية المستدامة بالمنطقة العربية، نحو ثلث الدول العربية تعيش تحت وطأة جرائم جماعية، إما مرتكبة داخلياً من قبل حكوماتها أو مرتكبة من قبل قوات احتلال خارجية. عم نحكي عن فلسطين المحتلة، عم نحكي عن الشعب السوري، الشعب اليمني، الشعب الليبي، الشعب اللبناني، الشعب السوداني. وبالتالي ثلث الدول العربية تتعرض لجرائم جسيمة من نوع الجرائم الدولية اللي بيعاقب عليها القانون الإنساني الدولي، تتراوح من الإبادة الجماعية، حتى لو اختلفنا على التوصيفات مش هلأ وقتها، وتصل إلى جرائم الاقتصادية الجماعية مثل ما صار بحق أكثر من 2 مليون مودع في لبنان. هل يمكن تحقيق تنمية مستدامة من دون العدالة؟ وكيف يمكن تحقيق العدالة إذا فشلت القوانين المحلية في تحقيق العدالة بسبب ضعف المؤسسات وعدم سيادة القانون بهذه الدول؟ بيأتي القانون الدولي كملاذ وكمرجع ملزم للحكومات، وبتأتي الأمم المتحدة وأجهزتها كالمنظمة التي يجب أن تلزم الدول الأعضاء بالاتفاقيات والقوانين الدولية الهادفة إلى حماية حقوق الأفراد والشعوب. لما بنسأل هل نجح القانون الدولي، بعتقد القانون الدولي لا يملك شخصية معنوية ليتحرك من تلقائه. القانون الدولي هو سند قانوني، أما من ينفذه فهو المجتمع الدولي. وبالتالي الأصح أن نسأل هل نجحت الأمم المتحدة كالمرجع أو الممثل أو المنظمة الدولية التي تمثل الحكومات، هل نجحت في تطبيق القانون الدولي الهادف لحماية الحقوق بكل أشكالها، الحقوق الاقتصادية، المدنية، السياسية، جميع أشكال الحقوق اللي تحدث عنها الإعلان العالمي لحقوق الإنسان والعهدين الدوليين الخاصين بالحقوق الاقتصادية والسياسية والمدنية وغيرها. هل نجحت؟ لم تنجح طبعا منظمة الأمم المتحدة. لو منظمة الأمم المتحدة نجحت ما كان بيكون في مراجعة سوف تحصل قريبا، ولابد من مراجعة للحوكمة داخل منظمة الأمم المتحدة لفاعلية عمل أجهزتها وخصوصا مجلس الأمن في تحقيق السلام والازدهار وأيضا استطرادا التنمية المستدامة. وبالتالي المشكلة موجودة حقيقة داخل ميثاق الأمم المتحدة. للأسف لا يمكن تعديل ميثاق الأمم المتحدة من دون موافقة حملة الفيتو، وبالتالي فمعضلة الفيتو واستخدام التعسف خلافا لإرادة أغلبية حكومات العالم مثل ما شفنا على الأقل بالأشهر القليلة الأخيرة بما تتعرض له فلسطين وغزة، وما رأيناه أيضا بالثمانين سنة الأخيرة، حيث أن نحو سدس واحد من كل 6 قرارات فيتو استخدمت ضد مشاريع قرارات من أجل السلام في المنطقة العربية. وهنا يتحول مجلس الأمن ليس إلى الجناح السياسي الهادف لتحقيق السلام، وإنما هو بيتحول إلى أداة تعرقل السلام الذي هو الهدف النهائي لمنظمة الأمم المتحدة. كيف يمكن تصحيح هذا الوضع المنحرف عن مفاهيم الديمقراطية والتمثيل العادل للشعوب؟ البعض بيقول بالذهاب نحو تأسيس ائتلافات دولية خارج إطار مجلس الأمن. لست أدري، لأنه حتى القضاء الدولي لما نتحدث عن مراجع دولية قضائية مثل محكمة العدل الدولية أو مثل المحكمة الجنائية الدولية، مع الاختلاف بين اثنين، أولى تتبع الأمم المتحدة، الثانية مستقلة عنا، جنائية مستقلة، ولكن حتى هذه المراجع هي بحاجة إلى الإرادة السياسية للدول الأطراف فيها من أجل تنفيذ قراراتها. والدول أو على الأقل الإرادة السياسية لأشخاص حاكمين لهذه الدول كثيرا ما تتأثر بالمصالح السياسية الداخلية. ولكن على الأقل المشهد اللي عم نشوفه بالسنوات الأخيرة بالعقد الأخير من توجه من حكومات وأفراد نحو قضاء دولي، إنما هو محاولة التفتيش عن ملاذ خارج مجلس الأمن الذي فشل ويفشل ويفشل جهود تحقيق السلام في المنطقة العربية على الأقل. استطردت بموضوع كيف القانون الدولي أو منظمة الأمم المتحدة نجحت في تطبيق القانون الدولي لمصلحة الأفراد والشعوب.
طيب، شفنا في محاولة من خلال محكمة العدل الدولية لاستعادة بعض الثقة، ولكن أيضا تم تقويض مقررات هاي المحكمة. كيف يمكن تستعاد الثقة بالعدالة الدولية حتى لما بتحاول يعني مؤسسات دولية ومرجعيات دولية أنه تعمل شغلها، ولكن منلاقي أيضا صناع القرار، المراجع الدولية الكبرى بتقوض هالشي؟ منحس أنه نحن بمأزق، يعني إذا ما لجأنا للعدالة الدولية لمين منلجأ؟
طبعا لأنه لما يفقد المواطن العربي ثقته بالنظام القضائي الوطني للأسباب اللي بنعرفها، اللي هي أنه معظم الدول العربية ليس القانون ما يسود فيها، وإنما الحكم اللي ممكن يكون مش حكم بيعبر عن تمثيل ديمقراطي للشعب. فلما يشوف القضاء الدولي أيضا عم يداس وعم يتم الاستخفاف فيه مثل ما حصل قوات الاحتلال الإسرائيلية، وما في خلاف إن احتلال، هيدا قرارات صادرة عن الأمم المتحدة بتأكد إنه احتلال. فلما دولة الاحتلال الإسرائيلية بتدوس بكل عدم اكتراث وتجاهل واستخفاف ولا إنسانية، قرارات صدرت بالشهر الماضي قبل شهر وشوي 29 يناير جانيوري كانون الثاني، قرارات مؤقتة بتأمرها بإدخال الإغاثة الإنسانية للجياع والمشردين اللي جوعتهم وهجرتهم بغزة، وبتمتنع إسرائيل وبتأمرها أيضا المحكمة بأن توقف فوراً كل الأعمال العسكرية واللي بترقى لقتل وإيذاء واضطهاد وتحريض على الإبادة، ولكن أيضاً تستمر بهذه الأعمال المواطن العربي، وبعتقد مواطن بكل دول العالم باستثناء الدول الكبرى القادرة على حماية نفسها وشعوبها إذا ما هي عم تنتهك لهم حقوقهم من الدول القوية الأخرى، رح يشعروا بأنه شو معنى القانون الدولي وشو له لازمة. باعتقادي أنه هيدا النتيجة اللي ممكن يوصل، يعني هذا ما هو يراد، ما تريده الدول الخارجة عن القانون مثل إسرائيل والدول الداعمة لها، هو أن يفقد المجتمع الدولي الثقة بالقانون الدولي وأن يتوقف عن المطالبة بتطبيقه. الحل من أجل استعادة الثقة بالقانون الدولي هو إلزام الدول ومعاقبة الدول الخارجة عن القانون الدولي مثل إسرائيل، إلزام به أو معاقبتها عليه. إذا عجز مجلس الأمن عن ذلك بسبب تعسف وانحياز الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية وغيرها من حملة الفيتو ضد القوانين الدولية، هذا انحياز ضد القوانين الإنسانية الدولية، ضد مصلحة الشعوب، فلا بد للدول التي تقول إنها تريد تحقيق العدالة أن تتحرك فرادى لأنها محمية بالقانون الدولي. لابد لهذه الدول أن تتحرك جماعة فرادى أو جماعات من أجل تطبيق هذه القرارات بكل الوسائل الممكنة، وكل الوسائل الممكنة أيا كانت، سياسية، قضائية، اقتصادية وعسكرية، هي مشروعة طالما أنها تنفذ قرارات صادرة عن محكمة دولية. وهذا هو امتحان للحكومات التي تريد أن تتحرر من حظيرة فيتو مجلس الأمن.
شكرا كثير المحامية ديالا شحادة. Our next speaker will be virtual with us. It's our dear friend Marwa Fatafta, MENA Policy and Advocacy Director, Access Now. Hello Marwa, how are you?
Hi Diana, it's really great to see you, and
great to see you.
Lovely to be with you all here today.
Thank you, Marwa. Marwa, as you know, the topic of the conference today, you know that you have been covering lots of technical challenges facing content consumers online and the limitations that are imposed by tech companies, by so many factors, whether governmental or technology companies. One additional criteria today we have is the artificial intelligence and how this new technology is going to be governed, what type of governance, what type of challenges. What can you tell us about the new layer of challenges that is imposed by AI, and what is the best governance that could be recommended that can guarantee freedom, but also can guarantee rights and protect the vulnerable?
Thank you, Diana. So I want to start by explaining what we do. So I work for Access Now. We are a grassroots to global human rights organization. Our mission is to defend and extend the rights of people and communities at risk. And so we look at the impact of technologies on people and how they're able to exercise their rights. And the UN over the last decade has asserted that people's rights online are just as important as they apply to them offline. And there has been, I think for the last decade, we have been still grappling with the impact of certain technologies, for example, the advent of social media platforms and how it revolutionized our civic space in good and in bad ways. And most recently, there's been a lot of hype about AI, but I think it is important to reflect the governance of AI in the looking into the future, because these systems have proliferated in recent years and seeped into different aspects of our lives. The AI systems are used to monitor and control us in public spaces through the use of biometric surveillance and facial recognition technologies. They predict the likelihood of future criminality, for example, predictive policing systems used by law enforcement and courts. They predict our emotions, they categorize us. They also make crucial decisions that determine our access to public services, welfare, education, and employment. And as we have recently seen in Gaza, the most dystopian and really problematic usage of AI to generate military targets that result in the mass killing of civilians and the destruction of civilian infrastructure, which is deployed outside of the realm of regulation or at least minimum ethical frameworks. And I want to emphasize here that those systems are data hungry. So AI systems require data to operate, to train, and to make decisions. And unfortunately, that not only carries serious risks to fundamental rights and freedoms, including the right to housing, the right to health, the right to life, the right to express ourselves, among others. But in the Arab world, the data governance system, so we have those data-hungry AI systems deployed, but the data governance system we have, or the architecture, if you may, is lacking. So only a handful of Arab states have, for instance, robust data protection frameworks. As a matter of fact, only a handful of countries have adopted and enacted data protection laws, and those who have, these laws are either outdated, so they belong to an era that predates, for example, social media, and those who have been implemented or enacted recently, they have serious loopholes that undermine the whole purpose of having such a framework. So we're talking about a system where private businesses, governments deploy and implement and use these technologies that impact people's lives and their ability to exercise their rights without transparency and without safeguards or protection, let alone, of course, the fact that people don't know or have or give consent to the use and the processing of their personal information, which is a fundamental pillar to data protection, that you as a person have agency over your personal information and can decide who is allowed to have your personal information and to what purposes are they allowed to use it. Now, without a strong regulation, whether it be related to data protection or regulation of those systems themselves, companies and governments will continue to use AI systems, which exacerbates mass surveillance, it exacerbates structural discrimination, and there has been a multitude of studies that point to the impact, the discriminatory impact and results of AI systems. They do centralize power in the hands of a few large tech companies, and they also make decision-making, public decision-making unaccountable. So the main problem with AI governance at the moment is that the digital transformation agenda has been set in motion. It moves so fast. Technology deployment and innovation is rapid, but regulation and policymaking is slow. And even if we put together on paper the most excellent and ideal AI regulation system, there will be tomorrow, in the next few years, new technologies emerging that again put the existing governance systems to test. And so I think there are a few pillars, if you may, to ensure that any regulation is right respecting. I mean, the first important aspect is risk assessment. Any system deployed by governments, by companies, should be done after there are human rights impact assessments done to understand how these systems, once deployed, impact people. There should be also transparency. People have the right to know when AI systems are used to determine, for instance, whether you will get a loan from your bank to buy a house or buy an apartment or be employed. Often, again, these decisions are taken in sort of a black box, and without transparency, there's no accountability. And so this leads me to my third point, that there should be also access to remedy and access to information, and people able to appeal and lodge complaints to challenge decisions made by AI systems when they negatively impact their lives. This being said, from a human rights perspective, as a human rights civil society organization, we believe that certain technologies do not belong to the future, and they should be absolutely banned because they are inherently incompatible with human rights norms and standards. For example, biometric surveillance technologies, facial recognition technologies used in public spaces. There is no way that you can use these technologies in a necessary or proportionate manner. It will only entrench mass surveillance. It will erode people's ability to exercise their civic and political rights, such as, for instance, being able to protest as freely and anonymously if needed. So biometric surveillance technologies should be banned. Emotion recognition technologies should be banned. Those technologies that infer people's emotions, and systems that are, for instance, predictive policing systems that predict whether a person will commit a crime in the future, or the likelihood of certain locations being, let's say, crime-ridden. But again, there's been a lot of evidence that those technologies suppress marginalized groups, often have a disproportionate impact on already heavily policed and heavily criminalized minorities, or neighborhoods, or locations. Again, those systems cannot be used in a way that is compatible with the existing human rights norms, and should also be banned. And I know that this is not necessarily easy, and there's been a lot of back and forth between civil society and governments when it comes to regulation. But from experience, and also from assessing the risks of such technologies, as I said, there should be, when we move to the future, certain technologies should be put in the past and should be absolutely banned, as there is no way that we can use them in a right-respecting manner.
Thank you so much, Marwa, for this explanation. Here, it brings us to the golden equation. How can you guarantee free access for the public, for free information, and at the same time, you can have fair regulations not manipulated by governments? How can you guarantee this equation between freedom and regulations, not surveillance, as you just mentioned? And those who are having those regulations are mainly governments or technology companies that are sometimes also affected by governments. How can we reach the balance here?
I think there are 3 points I want to mention here. One is that with new technologies, often governments or policymakers have this dilemma of, we have this new technology, it brings new risks, what can we do? And we often forget that there are existing norms and standards in international human rights law that can help guide us into ensuring that we have access to a free, secure, and open internet. And that's something that the Secretary General has highlighted in his Global Digital Compact policy brief. And any systems must be anchored in universal human rights that, of course, enable the attainment of the SDGs. So we need to, the starting point should always come from a human-centric approach guided by existing human rights law standards. Do we need new norms? Sometimes, yes. I think those technologies do challenge some of the existing norms, and I think the upcoming summit is a great starting point to reflect on and taking a stock of where are the normative gaps and regulatory gaps and how we can address them. But I want to emphasize on the point that there's already existing standards that we can use. For example, the principle of necessity, proportionality, legality, that sadly often are dismissed when we talk about privacy invasive technologies, such as, for instance, biometric surveillance. Second point is, and that might make me unpopular here, that we should be really cautious and wary of tech solutionism. We often think that if we throw new technologies at problems that we've been grappling with for decades, they might somehow disappear or be magically solved. And I think the humanitarian sector is a great example of that, where we see the rapid deployment of biometric, for example, technologies, iris scanning technologies, asking refugees to give away their fingerprints and iris scans in order to have access to food. There's a huge empire or infrastructure out there that is built on that premise. And companies, of course, have vested interest in driving this agenda forward for no other reason but profit. The generative AI is a great example of that, where we see in the last 2 years, new technologies emerge out of nowhere. They exacerbate existing issues like disinformation, deepfakes. But we need to always think, and when I mean we, I mean civil society, companies, UN institutions, government. Is this a problem that can be solved without technology? And why do we need new technologies to solve these existing problems? There should always be a high threshold of justification, and as well as a high threshold of protection when we talk about data invasive and privacy invasive technologies. And the third one is digital cooperation. When we talk about regulation, we often think either at a multi-stakeholder level, as a global level, or within our national jurisdictions. But we have seen examples where certain countries, the EU is one excellent example of that push certain technologies or certain agendas. We've seen, for example, the donation of biometric surveillance technologies from the EU, from the European Commission specifically, to Arab states under the pretext of fighting terrorism, under the pretext of fighting migration. And those technologies were maybe regulated in the EU. Once they hit the shores of Arab states, they are operational without the realm of any regulation, let alone, of course, transparency or accountability, resulting in further human rights abuses and oppression. So there we need to think of digital cooperation, think of the cross-border data agreements, cross-border technology transfers, and how we can tackle this agenda from a holistic and cooperational point of view.
Marwa Fatafta from Access Now, thank you so much. We'll be moving now to our next speaker, Ms. Shireen Hussain, Professor of Health and Social Care Policy, Department of Health Services Research and Policy, London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. Welcome, thank you for being with us. Shireen, I would like to ask you, the effects of accounts of demographic and societal changes have yet to be given concerted efforts by governments in planning processes. Why and how should we begin to imagine the impact of these changes for future generations? How does equality or justice come into the discussion?
Thank you so much for having me today. I just want to highlight some of the work that I'm doing. So in addition of being a professor of health and social care, I founded a new network, which is called the Menara Network, focusing on healthy aging in the Middle East. And the reason I did this is the kind of significant demographic change that has been happening, particularly in the region, that has gone invisible and kind of unobserved by many governments and policies. So we're living in a world where there are mega trends of aging populations, of migration, of climate change, of social change. And we're seeing these changes happening at a significant speed in the region. So, of course, we have countries in most of Europe and OECD countries which have already aged. And by aging population, I mean that there is a significant proportion of the population are older people. But these countries, most of them have gone through this process through maybe 175 years in the UK, 150 years in France. What we're seeing in the Arab region is a dramatic change. So we are seeing forecasts for some countries, particularly Gulf countries, that they will start their transition in 2030, and they will take 10 to 12 years to complete that transition. That's a scary number to think about. And the fact that we are seeing these new phenomena with an escalated old phenomena, particularly migration, urbanization, social change, and people, the living norms are changing, where people live are changing. The social responsibilities remain, but the ability to manage these social responsibilities are kind of mitigated by different factors. I want to think about really bringing in this transition into the conversation. So the Pact for the Future talks about youth and future generations, but think about these younger people now that they are going to be older people in the near future, and think about the changes structure of the population, and the lack of imagination. So because we don't have this collective history, we tend to imagine in the region our lives to a certain point of time, and then not to think about what's going to happen in the future. And without an imagination, we cannot think about our future. So let alone the futures of current older population, but the young people and the future. And of course, when we come to this conversation, issues of health and ill health comes into the fora. But I want to speak about other aspects. So I'll touch upon these, but I want to speak about other aspects. So obviously, longevity is something that we want to celebrate. It's wonderful that within the region, countries, in average, people are living longer, but we also live longer with ill health, with disease. And that means that we spend quite a bit of our time at the end of our years, considerable number of years, and sometimes over decades, in ill health. And that means that we need support systems, both in terms of health and social care. And in the region, we have the narrative of community and support within the families. But the realities of other changes, where we have smaller families, we have people living away from each other, we have internal and external migration, and of course, we have shocks and crises and conflicts that lead to people being separated. We don't have the systems, or we are losing some of the social system to support each other's. And I don't want to narrate it in a way that it's a crisis or a competition, or losing, some cohorts are losing because they have to care for other cohorts. The reality that some do, there is a huge care burden, but there is always a win-win solution if we think into the future. And one key of this is to think about complementarity and responsibilities, and to harness some of the issues that we have. But we have to learn about changing lives and changing responsibilities and our life course from early on. So I would say that as we think about youth unemployment, as we think about youth education, we have to think about youth life expectancies and how they prepare for the future, and how systems can come together to support all segments of the society, ensuring, of course, human rights for older people. So we do these kind of aging shifts that happening within other kind of changes, changing and offer a complex system, and we have to employ system thinking here. So while for aging is unfolding rapidly, I would like to see aging featuring more in policy dialogue. I would like to see the Pact for the Future, which talks about future generation, explicitly talking about aging and longevity, and explicitly talking about responsibilities of the state to organize and to reimagine the lives of different generations. And we're seeing this happening across the world. We're seeing the bidirectional benefits across generation. We're seeing that older generations provide wealth of information. They provide actually transforming wealth across generation, providing housing, providing childcare, and we're seeing the other way around. But we cannot assume that this will continue in an organic way. States and governments and NGOs has to come into the fora to discuss these explicitly, and to think about how, while we are preparing our infrastructure And by infrastructure, I am talking not only about health and care systems, I am talking about how the infrastructure of a country can offer opportunities of meaning, participation, and engagement for all age group. So yes, the UN is thinking about engaging young people in a meaningful way. The opportunity to engage older people in the region in a meaningful way is very minimal. And there is huge inequalities across this lens. So we're seeing, of course, people who have held professional jobs in their lives, when they were younger, they were able to continue during their older ages to contribute and participate. But this is not the story across the board. And there is a lot of gender inequalities as well in this story. So we're seeing women living alone for longer, living with ill health for longer. A lot of women has relied on informal work during their younger lives. They don't have pensions, they don't have financial security, and they are relying on people who might not be around anymore. So my call here is to think about the future that has this very lively patterns of people, and think of them as connected. Although that, of course, with limited resources, one can think about competing demands and competing policy priorities. But there are win-win solutions if we think about cohorts that are younger now will be older in the future, and current older cohorts can benefit the younger cohorts and vice versa. So we need to bring this into the conversation explicitly in policy documents. And I would hope that Chapter 4 would include these elements very, very explicitly in terms of longevity, in terms of healthy longevity and productive longevity as well. So I'll stop here and take your further questions.
Thank you, Shireen. Before I open the floor to questions, I would like to ask you briefly what innovative policies that you recommend that could be adapted to face the challenges, if you can tell us briefly.
Sure. I think preparedness is thinking about every factor and weighing which will influence success. The obvious thing is to think about your health infrastructure, think about people that are living longer. What do you need to do now to feel better in the future? But my key to the region is knowledge and awareness. I think we still have a lot to do in terms of being aware of this phenomenon, and think about working with different cohorts and across generations. So within and across generations. And this is a global trend. So at the moment, the WHO is pushing into the agenda, or the Commission on Social Inclusion, combating ageism, cross-learning between generations. So acknowledging the softer, low-hanging, tangible success criteria that we already have, while we are building the infrastructure for healthy lives. And I'll give you a lot of examples across the world, which is creating spaces for generations to interact, creating communities to come together, even if they are not from the same family. So we'll find in Europe, because of the funding pressures they have because of the aging populations, they are creating what they call care communities. So care communities mean that cohorts would come together, would help each other in different ways. We see in Italy, the multi-generational clubs that brings people who are not related together, but from different generations, to exchange knowledge, to support each other, whether younger people helping older people with technology, and so on. But we shouldn't leave it just to be community-based and NGOs and individual efforts. That has to come within a government strategy. So I would like to see very clear aging and long-term care strategies developed collectively and within countries. And I don't want to see this put on the shelf, but it has very practical implications. How are we going to implement the different interventions to prepare us for a better futures for all generations, acknowledging that the social structure is changing, and we have to replace this with things that are tailored to our cultures, but also that are economic, efficient use of technology, but with all the caveats that we've heard about, and recognize it that system shocks affect older people and vulnerable people much more than younger populations, and building in resilience and systematic changes within the system to shape these kind of support mechanisms and don't leave it into just kind of organically to happen from bottom up, but to harness, we've got a lot of good narrative to harness this, but to put it in practice. So I hope that we'd start the thinking about engaging different cohorts, thinking about the life course, thinking about different trajectories of life, that we just not learn, work, and then retire, and then we have 23 years of our lives, we're not sure what to do with them. But we have to think about relearning and re-engaging and working in different way. And we're not, older people are not competing with younger people. There's space for everyone, and building a good future for older people now means building a good future for younger people for tomorrow.
Thank you so much, Shireen Hussein. Now we still have like 30 to 35 minutes. I would like to open the floor for questions and interventions. Please present yourself and limit your question or intervention to 2-3 minutes. Lady in the green, تفضلي.
Thank you so much. It's a nice nickname, I like it. شكرا جزيلا لكم وشكرا للمتحدثين لأنكم وضعتم أصابعكم على الجروح التي تخص النظام القانوني الدولي وازدواجية المعايير في تطبيقه أثناء الحروب والاحتلال والاستعمار الاستيطاني. ولكن سؤالي للأستاذ جمال يخص ازدواجية المعايير في النظام الاقتصادي العالمي. تعمل برامج الإصلاح الهيكلي التابعة للIMF والورلد بانك على فرض تغييرات هيكلية على الحكومات في المنطقة وخاصة في دول الجنوب، وهي تطالب بسحب دور الدولة وعدم التدخل لحماية القطاعات الإنتاجية، وكانت النتائج بالفعل في كثير من الأحيان سيئة جداً على مؤشرات الفقر وعدم المساواة، وحتى على مؤشرات النمو في القطاعات الإنتاجية، وأدى إلى ركود الاستثمار في القطاع مش بس العام، أيضاً الخاص، وخاصة عند صغار المنتجين اللي هم بينتجوا للسوق المحلي وليس للتصدير. لم تمر الدول المتقدمة والصناعية بنفس الشروط لا تاريخياً ولا في الوقت الحاضر، حيث يحصل المنتجون والمزارعون في أمريكا وأوروبا على سبيل المثال على جميع أنواع الإعانات. هاي من شق ثاني، يعني في المحاضرة تم التركيز على موضوع العولمة والحاجة إلى العولمة في سياق الأزمات الصحية والاقتصادية والحروب والاحتلال اللي بيتحكم بالأسعار ووصول التجارة وحتى الدعم الإنساني. كيف يمكننا الدعوة إلى دولنا إلى المزيد من الاعتماد على العولمة والسوق الدولية ونتوقع في ذات الوقت استقرار الأسعار؟ Thank you.
شكرا لك. تفضل.
Thank you very much. Fadi Salim, I'm the Director of Policy Research at the Mohammed bin Rashid School of Government in Dubai. My question is to Mr. Ryder, and we know that the input, or the UN is gathering input for the global summit, for the Summit of the Future from member states. Yet many countries in the global south, including this part of the world, we have an issue of lack of representation of the government for their people, or sometimes by outcome or by interest of the government. So how can you ensure that the output of the global summit represents these kind of populations that are lacking representation in their input, or lacking civil society organizations that can do that, provide that input to represent these entities? And the second is, once you have the output or the outcome of the global of the Summit of the Future, representing, with best of attempts, the global view, what policy instruments, and you are heading policy in the UN, what policy instrument does the UN plan to have to govern the implementation of that output going forward, to ensure that these are future-proof as well as implementable? Thank you.
Thank you. تفضل.
شكرا. بس أنا عاوز أتكلم في 3 نقاط سريعا على المستوى يعني حتى نتحدث عن بالنسبة للمنطقة العربية واستشراف المستقبل. يعني على 3 مستويات. على مستوى الدول العربية أو دول المنطقة، بعض الدول السودان، اليمن، العراق، فلسطين المتأثرة يعني بتعاني كثير من المشكلات المؤسسية، بالذات في القدرات الدقيقة والرقيقة اللي هي جانب السياسات والمعلومات. يعني القدرة المؤسسية على رعاية المبادرات في مجال التنمية المستدامة والحماية الاجتماعية يمكن بتكون ضعيفة، يعني تفتقد فيها الكثير من المقدرات، وضعف المقدرة على مواجهة حالات الفقر والعوز الإنساني في حالات الأزمات. يعني مثلا الأزمة في السودان في ظل شح الدعم الدولي لها والاستجابات الكبيرة، يعني يمكن المجتمع قام بدور كبير. حتى قدرة الدولة في حالة الحرب يعني على تعزيز هذا الجانب الاجتماعي وحصره وتنظيمه وتكميله كانت ضعيفة بسبب الحرب وضعف القدرات المؤسسية. الجانب الثاني المهم هو على المستوى الإقليمي. المنطقة العربية يعني بتشهد تباعد اقتصادي وتنموي وتواصلي، يعني يمكن وتفاوت، يعني إذا جاز شبه طبقي، يعني دول غنية مرتبطة بالاقتصاد الدولي وتقسيم الاقتصاد على مستوى دولي، دول متوسطة الدخل يعني شبكاتها في الحماية الاجتماعية والتأمينات والاستجابة لبرامج التنمية المستدامة يعني ضعيفة إلى حد ما، ودي الدول المتوسطة النمو. الدول LDCs يعني هي بتعاني بعض المشاكل في مجال تأمين الأمن الغذائي، المشاكل السياسية، النزاعات، ودون أن يكون هنالك تكامل إقليمي للوقوف الأجانب أو على الأقل لتوجيه الاستثمار في داخل بعض الدول اللي للأسف الشديد الدول اللي عندها نزاعات هي دول فيها موارد عظمى، السودان، ليبيا، العراق، اليمن. أفتكر على المستوى الدولي دي النقطة الأخيرة بالنسبة للمنطقة العربية في تحيزات ليس على مستوى يعني تطبيق وقراءة القانون الدولي وعدم تجريم الجرائم الموجهة اللي بتحصل في فلسطين وفي السودان والتدخلات الإقليمية الموجودة في داخل هذه الدول كما أشارت الأخت ديالة شحادة. يعني لا يوجد إدانة، لا توجد وقوف، لا يوجد اهتمام، كأنها حرب منسية في السودان وفي فلسطين، زائد التحيزات على مستوى الدعم والإغاثات الموجهة. يعني جميع المنظمات لأقل سبب تنسحب عن تقديم المساعدة للمواطنين. صحيح واقع الحرب وواقع المرور في السلام وأمان نشهد بعض المشاكل ونشهد بعض الضعف في الالتزام في الحرب بإيصال هذه المساعدات، لكن أنا أفتكر أنه هذه حرب منسية للمجتمع الدولي، وافتكر أنه بدون هذه المبادئ الثلاثة مستوى التضامن على المستوى الوطني والإقليمي والالتزام الدولي تجاه المنطقة العربية نحن أفتكر بنستشرف إنفاذ مبادئ التنمية المستدامة وأهدافها ومقتضياتها بصورة أفتكر غير مناسبة ومتفاوتة. شكرا.
شكرا لك. تفضل.
سؤالي موجه للسيد رايدر. يعني قمة المستقبل هي مجرد لإيجاد ميثاق أو لتسريع وتحفيز أهداف التنمية المستدامة، أم يتم إعادة النظر بخطة عمل الأمم المتحدة حتى عام 2030 في ضوء الإنجازات المتحققة خلال الفترة الماضية، وخاصة فيما يتعلق بالمشكلات والصعوبات وزيادة التفاوت التنموي في مجال أهداف التنمية بين الدول؟ شكرا.
شكرا. أسئلة أخرى؟ تفضل. تفضل.
شكرا. سؤالي موجه لأستاذة ديالة. موافق جدا مع كل اللي اتقال من ناحية الامبيونيتي اللي بيواجهه المجتمع الدولي حاليا، وفكرة الاناركيك سيستم اللي احنا فيها عامة خلت ناس كتير تفقد الثقة في القانون الدولي وتطبيق القانون الدولي، والكونسيكونسز بتاع ان انت مثلا حتى يطلع قرار من ICJ او مجلس الامن او ايا كان و nothing happens بعدها. وان انت قلتي في النص ان لو ما حدش هيطبق ده فلازم على المجتمع الدولي نفسه باقي الدول ان هي تلاقي حلول او طرق اقتصاديه سياسيه وحتى عسكريه ان هي تنفورس القرارات بتاع الاي سي جي. فشفنا اقتصاديا recently مع روسيا اتحط عليها sanctions الدنيا والاخره ولسه الاقتصاد بتاعها شغال عادي. سياسيا بنتكلم كتير في الجمعيه العامه وفي مجلس الامن وكله كلام. وعسكريا لو في دول تانية اتدخلت على حساب على حساب القانون الدولي فاحنا ممكن ندخل في World War 3. فكنت عايز اعرف يعني if you could elaborate اكتر على ايه الحلول اللي ممكن يعني pragmatically تبقى موجودة علشان يعني يبقى في نرجع ثقة المجتمع الدولي في القانون الدولي. شكرا.
شكرا لك. هل من أسئلة أخرى أو تفضل.
شكرا جزيلا. شكري بن يحيى من صندوق الأمم المتحدة للسكان المكتب الإقليمي. هو تعقيب على تدخل السيدة شيرين فيما يتعلق
إذا ممكن تقرب الميكروفون لو سمحت.
أوكي. تعقيبا على مداخلة وتتمة لما قالته الأستاذة شيرين حول كبار السن أو الشباب، فلابد أن نأخذ بعين الاعتبار أن قضايا الشباب أو قضايا كبار السن لابد أن تدرج ضمن سياسات السكان والتنمية بصفة عامة وليس بصفة يعني مستقلة أو أدرست يعني فيرتيكالي. فيما يخص حقوق الإنسان لكبار السن، يعني هناك مبادرات إقليمية لا بد أن يقع التعرض إليها، لأنه لا ننتقل أو لا ننطلق من الصفر. هناك الاستراتيجية العربية لكبار السن، وهي الاستراتيجية يعني مثل أمبريلا لكل الدول العربية التي وافقت عليها والتي تتم حاليا تنفيذها على المستوى العربي من 2019-2029. وتحت هذه الأمبريلا هناك قضايا حقوق الإنسان بصفة عامة مدرجة. قضايا الإنسان في كبار السن هناك قرابة 10: الحق في الصحة، الحق في التعليم، الحق في المشاركة إلى آخره. فهذه كلها كصندوق، حتى كصندوق المتحدة للسكان أو بالتعاون مع الإسكوا، نقوم حاليا بإعداد بعض الدراسات. مثلا مؤخرا قمنا بمراجعات لكل السياسات والاستراتيجيات العربية، فوجدنا إما أنها قديمة أو أنها غير مبنية على البيانات not evidence based. اثنين، قمنا كذلك بإعداد بعض الكونتري بروفايلز، يعني خلفية البيانات حول كل دولة فيما يتعلق بحقوق الإنسان وكبار السن. فشفنا أنه في تحديات كبيرة جدا، وهذا نتفق فيه مع الأخت شيرين، أنه في تحديات كبيرة جدا فيما يتعلق بكبار السن في العالم العربي، وهذا ما نعمل حاليا عليه على تقوية هذا العنصر. وشكرا.
شكرا. أي أسئلة أخرى؟ طيب, we'll give final comments to our speakers. Mr. Ryder, would you reply or respond to the points that have been risen and addressed to you?
Well, thank you very much. There were a couple of questions addressed to me, but if you'll allow me just concisely to reflect on some of the interventions I've heard as well. On human rights and the rule of law, I should have said in my initial introduction, I failed to do so, that after very careful consideration by our member states, they decided that human rights and indeed issues of gender equality, empowerment of women should be considered cross-cutting issues across all 5 chapters of the Pact to be negotiated. And I think we have to acknowledge that this comes at a time both when there are major pushbacks against human rights and the proper application of international law in the fields of human rights and humanitarian law, and growing impunity and a sentiment of impunity in these areas. These are realities of our world. It was interesting to see, was it not, last year we celebrated the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. In all of those celebrations, nobody spoke against that declaration or said it was inappropriate or outdated. And yet we live in a world where that rhetoric of support is accompanied by actions which belie that support. So we're in a sort of 2 sets of parallel realities, and these are issues which are going to have to be addressed. It's going to be very difficult. On technology, look, there are risks and challenges in respect of technology, which are being dealt with and dealt with very deliberately. But I don't think that should sort of lead us into a binary position. There are major benefits, there are extraordinary benefits available to us through technological innovation. There is no inconsistency, I think, in proceeding with the promotion of innovation and at the same time taking care of the downside risks, which are very evident in artificial intelligence areas, but are with us already in the digital space. The activities of digital platforms spewing out misinformation, disinformation, and hate speech is a reality that we have today. In the margins of the Pact, we intend to adopt a code of conduct for these digital platforms to try to address those issues. So much more on demographics, because I think it's a very important addition to the conversation. Yes, I think you can be sure that in the chapter of the Pact which deals with future generations, these issues of intergenerational dynamics, I was going to say intergenerational solidarity, but that makes an assumption. Intergenerational dynamics, a whole of life approach, life cycle approach will be taken on board. It's being discussed actively. I think one of the mistakes we make when we talk about aging populations in some parts of the world, the opposite in others, is to take an overly economistic attitude to these phenomena. We tend to think in terms of sustainability, of social protection, how we keep our labor markets working effectively. And actually, that misses out on a whole set of issues which have been brought out by the speakers this morning. I think it's very, very important. And I think one approach is to look at the reorganization of personal biographies. We have to get out of this notion of sequential life cycles. We learn, we work, we retire, we become inactive, we become recipients of care. That sequential biography is less and less the norm. These phases of life, as they currently are becoming entangled with each other. They become consecutive. On the two questions put to me, representation in this process of negotiation, well, there is one simple and hard fact of the matter. The negotiations currently taking place in New York are intergovernmental negotiations. There's 193 representatives of our member states who are in the room negotiating. And yet we have made very extensive efforts, and this is not an uncontroversial issue, to involve different stakeholders, different constituents in the discussion. That's been done formally in the consultations which have taken place. There will be a major civil society conference in Nairobi in May, which I think will be a very, very important moment going forward. But part of the process has been very much moved and motivated by the need and interest of having as wide a spread of voices heard as possible. What happens after the summit? The summit is a moment in time, it's not the end of history. Depending on what finds its way into the Pact, we will have a major job to do, and I cannot predict what that will be. We will have a major job to do of following through on that, be it in the field of finance, be it in the field of peace and security, technology. If even a relatively small proportion of the proposals that the Secretary General has put on the table are adopted at this summit, we have an enormous institutional job to follow through upon them, and I think that will be the forward path. Last word. All of the issues you've brought up here in this room, in this really very rich discussion today, they're issues which have been thrown around the negotiating room in New York as well. They are being thrown around by your representatives, your member state representatives. It is so important that they hear what you have to say, and that feeds into their involvement in the negotiating process. There are major capacity problems of your negotiators. Many member states have trouble covering all of these issues. They need to hear your voices. They need to feel the push from their own countries to get involved and to make the points that you have been making so effectively. And in the months ahead, there are still 6 months ahead of us, I hope that we can see an amplification of that process.
Thank you, Mr. Ryder. Professor, two fair points regarding economical double standards and how globalization can help settle the markets. Would you respond to the points that were addressed to you, please?
Yeah, thanks a lot for the question. Let me be very clear. You come to the World Bank or the IMF because you have no choice. If your country would have done a good job, you don't need this institution. So we have to agree on that principle. So when people show up in my office, they are bankrupt. They've done a bad job for the people, bad job for the poor, bad job for the economy. So they come say, rescue me. You are in chapter 11. Then come what needs to be done. Whether you like it or not, reforms matters. We have seen bad example, you are right. We have seen good example. Morocco is a very good example of adjustment operation. Morocco, if you look at the growth in Morocco, diversification of the economy, role of the private sector, development, financial sector, inclusion, it worked. Egypt, up to a certain limit, the first IMF program was going very well. Now Egypt has different kind of problem, not because of the IMF, because of the structure of their economy and the impact of the global economy. But Egypt will be able to go out, and the decision taken by the Minister of Finance yesterday on the exchange rate is an interesting one. It's not coming by accident. What I'm trying to tell you is structural reform is not because you have a choice. It's a must. And therefore, those adjustment program for 3-4 years is the pill that needs to get out of the Chapter 11 and bankruptcy you are. Poverty related to that are important. Safety net related to helping the poor, targeting the subsidy are part of this reform. Now, those countries that they don't do adjustment operation, the pain will be much longer and will be more painful and poverty will increase, and we have evidence of that. Now, on the issue of globalization, which is a very good question as well. If you don't want to be part of the global economy, you have to accept the fact that you're isolating yourself from the advantage of the global economy. If you look at our region, artificial intelligence, we're missing an action. Tell me the list of the 15 companies, except in the Gulf and Emirates, where I've seen some of them at the World Government Summit. In Qatar, they are doing a lot of research. Other countries, not as it should be. It has to be 2 to 3% of your GDP going in research and development. We're not doing it. If you go into globalization, it will get you the know-how. If China was able to become such an important player international, it's because they entered the World Trade Organization 15, 20 years ago, and they were able to get the economy and the property right and be able to influence the economy. So being part of the globalization is to influence the rest so you can get co-benefit of it. If you exclude yourself, like what's happening right now, you're going to be simply having a gap, and you're going to be missing most of the technological through that you need to have. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. تفضلي ديالا شحادة.
بخصوص الزميل هون كان عم يسأل إنه كيف يمكن للحكومات أن تواجه أو تطبق القانون الدولي خارج إطار مجلس الأمن سياسياً أو اقتصادياً أو عسكرياً بوقت صار في نوع من حصار أو عقوبات اقتصادية على روسيا لم تؤدي إلى إلزامها باحترام القانون الدولي. لازم يصير مثلا مع جهة محتلة ومرتكبة لانتهاكات جسيمة مثل إسرائيل هو امتناع عالمي، عزل عالمي سياسي واقتصادي. لما بقول عالمي طبعا مش كل دول العالم، ولكن أكثرية دول العالم، على الأقل دول المنطقة. لما دول المنطقة تمنع أن يحلق طائرات إسرائيلية أو متوجهة لإسرائيل لدعم اقتصاديا أو عسكريا في مياهها وفي مياهها الإقليمية وفي إقليمها الجوي، هذا العزل السياسي العسكري الاقتصادي طبعا بده يعطي نتيجة. الخيار العسكري هو آخر الملاذ، وأنا شخصيا لست من محبي الحروب، ولكن لوقف الجرائم بحجم الإبادات الجماعية كل الوسائل المشروعة بحسب القوانين الدولية يمكن أن تستعمل، ولكن بعد استنفاد كل الوسائل الممكنة قبل ذلك، والعالم لم يصل إلى حتى درجة بدء استنفاد. مجلس الأمن استنفدنا الثقة والمحاولات على مستواه، ولكن لم تستنفد الحكومات على الأقل 160 حكومة، أكثر من ثلثين دول العالم عم بيصوتوا بالجمعية العامة لوقف إطلاق نار، وأكثر من 50 دولة توجهت إلى محكمة العدل الدولية للتأكيد على الانتهاكات الجسيمة الإسرائيلية للقانون الدولي. نريد من هذه الدول أن تفعل أكثر من مجرد على أهميته الكلام، نريد منها أن تطبق بنفسها القانون الدولي بواحدة من هذه الوسائل التي ذكرت: المقاطعة الاقتصادية السياسية، تحصيل حاصل المقاطعة الاقتصادية، الامتناع عن الدعم الاقتصادي والعسكري. رأينا مجتمعات حقوقية مثل ما حصل بهولندا تتحرك بجرأة وجسارة لم نراها من حكومات عبر استحصال على قرار عن محكمة الاستئناف العليا في هولندا من أجل وقف دعم هولندا عسكريا ببعض أنواع العتاد العسكري لإسرائيل. إذا ما تحركت المجتمعات الحقوقية في الدول التي يسود فيها القانون طبعا مثل هولندا، فإن من الممكن استثمار قرارات القضائية الدولية بشكل أكثر فعالية وأكثر إضرارا للدول الخارجة عن القانون والمرتكبة للجرائم الأبشع بالتاريخ.
شكرا ديالا. رح اخذ جولة أسئلة أو تعليقات سريعة. تفضل.
نبيل سكر من سوريا. I have a question, دكتور جمال الصغير. Are the structural adjustments needed today different from what we used to talk about some 20-30 years ago? شكرا.
شكرا. Any other questions? Okay.
Yes.
Professor, تفضل.
I think this is a very relevant question. The adjustment operation that used to be in the 80s were much more harsh. It was, and the one that I was involved at the beginning after the collapse of the Soviet Union, where basically I want you to privatize all your enterprise, I want to liberalize completely, I want you to remove subsidy on energy, subsidy on agriculture, and I don't give you any safety net to protect the poor. Since the 1990-95, we have seen change in the form of the adjustment operation. They are much more structurally organized. They are sequenced on different trenches. In other words, I will give you $100 million if you do the first 3 or 4. And if you behave well, I'll give you another 100 million. So it's much more programmatic, based on specific output target, related also to impact on the economy, impact on the poor. If you are not able to reduce your poverty by X%, that means you have structural problem with your administration, with your same with anti-corruption, which is an important aspect, was added into the agenda. Governance, the way you operate, the way you manage, these are all new ideas, and especially the safety net that was created, and where money of budgetary support that will come through structural adjustment, a channel to safety net program to give cash transfer to the poor, because we came to the conclusion it's better to give cash to the poor so that they organize themselves than the government deciding himself what the poor need or don't need, and therefore give them the money. So yes, it has been a lot of evolution, a lot of lesson learned.
Thank you, Professor. I would like to move to Marwa and Shireen. Marwa, are you still with us? Okay. Yes, Marwa. Would you like to have closing remarks? You've heard the discussions, the questions. Would you like to have a final comment? تفضلي.
Yeah, very quickly, I want to respond to Mr. Ryder's comment. I think we are in agreement that we should not see technology as a binary, but we have to question the modus operandi of creating, testing, deploying technologies, and then treat human rights and the impact of those technologies as an afterthought. And the point here is that we need to shift that, radically shift that, so that human rights are baked in technology by design. There's privacy by design. There's gender sensitivity by design. And we don't need to reinvent the wheel. There are existing mechanisms. There are a plethora of tools out there. There is the UN guiding principles on business and human rights that dictate the responsibility on companies to ensure that their products, services, and policies do not infringe on fundamental rights, and they need to address and mitigate that. So we don't need to continue of let's deploy technology, see the impact, and then as we are now, for instance, the example you raised with social media platforms, we have still not got to a full solution to the problems raised by these platforms. Not to dismiss of course, the positive impacts, but this leads me to my second point, and it has been discussed quite intensively in this panel, and that is with the existence of the tools, the problem is not with the standards, the problem is with enforcement. And the question here is that how do we dismantle this impunity, this entrenched impunity where companies and governments disregard those existing standards day in and day out, whether it be in the deployment of technologies or, for example, in situations of war, as currently is the situation in Gaza. That's a problem across the board, irrespective of sectors, irrespective of technologies, and so on. So I'll leave it on that, and I'll hand it back to you.
Yeah. Thank you, Marwa. Thank you, Marwa. Closing remarks from you, Shireen, please.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. And just a couple of comments. So thanks, Mr. Ryder, of course, of highlighting that both kind of gender equality, human rights are a topic that cross-cutting, and also the conversation about longevity and changing as you call it, the kind of personal biography and how we arrange ourselves is in the Pact. It's very important to have this very explicit, the intersectionality between human rights and age and gender. So we have incentives for policymakers and for countries to take this along the way. So have explicit mentioning, have explicit suggestions and solutions, and realizing that in the region, along with other low and middle income countries, this pace of change is dramatic, it's significant, and it needs action now. And I'm really pleased with the intervention from the floor and thinking about kind of issues to do with older people as embedded within kind of social development policies. That is absolutely what we need to do. But I think we need awareness and knowledge and motivation to bring into the table these discussions. And the very strong point around lack of data and research. We do need evidence. There is a huge lack of data and research because of the historical focus when we think about the national surveys that have been happening in the region that has been focusing on reproductive health, focusing around the health and employment of young people. So we need a new drive to collect data, to collect evidence. And I can see that there are development. For example, there is a new national survey on aging that is going to happen in Egypt, Tunisia, and Jordan. However, there are lots of hurdles when collecting these data. But also think about other sources of data and really to come to this idea of changing awareness, reimagining, rethinking. We need more nuanced data. We need more qualitative understanding and qualitative solutions. And when we think about solutions, we have to think about true co-production. So we talk about co-produced solutions, but the first step is how to bring all those affected into the table and empower them and give them a voice to speak for themselves. With a history that there is a lot of older people don't think that they have a voice. They think that their life have completed, they've done their mission, their children are old, they have children. And bringing in the younger cohorts, the older cohorts, thinking about solution that will be feasible for all of them and have effect on all of these groups. And also bringing into the table stakeholders who have the decision-making authority, who can actually put together initiatives and implement them. So there has been a bit of development around policies about thinking around aging, but how to translate these and implement them into intervention that you have the buy-in from different groups. So co-production is key, but empowering groups to be able to voice their concerns is a very important step. And that comes from human rights, from understanding the diversity and the equality issues. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I would like to thank all the participants. Obviously, any sustainable development is not meant to prosper without accountability, without justice, without freedom. So these are the pillars of any future plans or any future strategies. Thank you so much for all your valuable interventions.
Thank you too, Diana. Thank you too.
Thank you. I would like to close the session with a recorded video message by Mr. Philippe Poulier, Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations for Youth Affairs. Thank you.
Excellencies, colleagues, dear young people, it is my pleasure to join you all today. I am Philippe Poulier, the United Nations Assistant Secretary General for Youth Affairs. I lead the newly established United Nations Youth Office mandated by the UN General Assembly to advance on youth issues. Today, the world is home to 1.9 billion young people. Half of the world's population is under 30 years old. Almost 90% of them live in developing countries. The Arab region has one of the youngest populations worldwide, with half of its population under the age of 25 years old. Young people are disproportionately affected by global challenges, like the climate crisis, ongoing conflicts, and persisting inequalities, just to name a few. In the Arab region, half of young people believe that their governments have not developed policies that address their needs and challenges. Only 1.8% of parliamentarians are younger than 30 years old. On the Arab region, the highest levels of youth unemployment in the world are 27%. Around 85% of the young population is in informal employment. But despite these challenges, young people in all their diversity are the driving force for societal change. They are fighting for a just, for an equal, for a peaceful and sustainable world for all that leaves no one behind. The upcoming Summit of the Future, it's a unique opportunity to act and to strengthen solidarity with the world's young people, building greater trust in public institutions. The summit will launch an action-oriented outcome titled the Pact for the Future, with one of its 5 key areas focusing on youth and future generation. I am excited by the proposed commitments on the initial draft of the Pact. This Pact includes concrete recommendations to ensure meaningful youth engagement as a norm rather than an exception at the global, regional, national, and local levels. This pact addresses the need for protection and appropriate financing. It also calls for transformative changes in tackling the root causes of inequality, poverty, injustice, and ill health and well-being. For action at national level, the Pact is calling for investment in accessible, quality and inclusive education and professional training. It's also the most important investment that states can make to ensure youth development. Establishing robust social security systems and social protection floors that respond to the needs and rights of young persons and children is needed. Addressing policy barriers that prevent young persons under the age of 30 from running for public leadership positions is also a necessity. Engaging young people in all decisions affecting their lives, livelihoods, and future is not a favor for young people. It is about protecting young people's fundamental rights and delivering on a global public responsibility. It is also a smart decision to make. For the Summit of the Future to be effective, we must make it everyone's business. So I urge decision makers to ensure that the Pact for the Future reflects the challenges and the opportunities of people at all levels, cities, villages, and communities around the world. I also call on every young person to raise your voices, to mobilize your peers, to educate your communities, and to ultimately continue to lead by example. Together with my team, I am committed to working with you all to ensure that we seize this once-in-a-generation opportunity of rebuilding trust in global governance and to join forces for a better today and tomorrow that leaves no youth behind. Thank you.
Enjoy your lunch. Thank you.